Okay, let me just try and get this in the right view.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay.
But it's like a part, so I believe you need to make, yeah. Basically, I see like 2 slides at once, and so if you can just, yeah, right now it's
Better.
yeah. I mean, like it's like somehow it's, I don't see it's like fully. I mean, like it's coming with the black parts in it. So maybe you can just rerun it one more time.
Okay, I can try this setting instead.
Yeah.
Is that any better?
Actually, let me check. It's like, yeah, it's like actually with the, I don't know, maybe we should try to share my screen one more time. You're going to stop sharing and doing one more time because it has like, I see it partly. Just like super strange. That's the very first time I see it actually in GoToWebinar. Just still not so good. Maybe we can try to stop doing web camera.
Okay.
I'm sorry, that's kind of a technical issues.
Let me try the reading view again. How does that look?
No, it's like with a black part on your slide. Yeah, maybe reconnecting. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry, guys, for that. It was like we were like just testing it and everything was perfect just a couple of hours ago. We're really sorry about that. Hold on.
The dress rehearsal is always better than the real one.
Yeah, so let's try to reconnect. I believe that should be fine. So I'm just going to remove it and you're going to join a session one more time.
Okay, sure, will do.
Yeah. Okay, I see Emily is coming back and hopefully everything is fine with your slides. Hey Emily, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly. So let's try one more time. And I thought like as far as I have your slides, maybe possibly we can try just to show my slides from my computer and you're going to tell me next slide, which is kind of a bit strange, but still it can be an option for us.
Yeah, I can try that. Let me see if I can get it working. So that's my screen there. Can you see that?
No, it's like with like black, it's just like partly only really small part I can see it. Okay, so what we are going to do, I'm going to share my screen right now with your slides. And so you're going to guide me and I will be moving through it. She's like, I'm really sorry, I don't know what a clash is like today.
That's okay. It always happens
Yeah.
with live broadcasts.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's integrity.
Yeah. So I'll grab presenter rights and just will share your slides. That's it. Okay. So can you see my screen?
I can see it, yes.
Okay. So let's do it. Please just guide me when I need to move.
Okay, no problem. Okay, everyone, welcome to Mining Google Analytics Content Ideas. This is a webinar version of a presentation I gave at Brighton SEO back in September. So if any of you are joining us who've seen that, then welcome back. I'm going to have a little bit more time to talk through some of the ideas, but basically what we're going to talk about today is which features within Google Analytics are most useful to us as writers and as content marketers. And specifically, I'm going to show you some of the reports that you can actually use in a slightly different way, maybe to how you're used to using them, to generate ideas for new content. Okay, next slide, please. So just a brief introduction to me. My name is Emily Hill, and for 9 years now I've run a copywriting agency called Write My Site. I'm in the process of launching a new website offering copywriting training. The launch date of 2015 might be slightly nudged back to 2016, given that we're already in December and it's not ready. But yeah, basically for the last sort of 9 years, I've been involved in creating online content. And a really big part of my job, even today, now that I've got an editorial team and I've got writers and everything, even today, a big part of my job is still to try and figure out what sort of content we should write for each and every one of our clients. There's no such thing in this industry as one size fits all, and it's really, really important to get the ideas right, because frankly, if we get them wrong, we get fired. So we're always looking for new tools and new ways to come up with the right content ideas for clients. Next slide, please. So the premise of my talk is Google Analytics and how we can use that. So let's just first address why we need it, or as the slide says, who needs Google Analytics anyway? We think of it as a tool for SEOs, but I think it's a really important tool for content marketers and for writers as well, because we basically have a brief from Google. We have an editorial brief, and that brief is to write quality content for the user, which I find a delightfully non-specific phrase. But they have done us a slight favour in providing us with a lot of very useful data within analytics that shows how users have treated our existing content. So my premise is, if we can understand how users have behaved with the content we've given them so far, then we've got a pretty good indication there of what we need to do to impress them with our future content. So I ran a little survey prior to the talk at Brighton, just to try and find out where people like me are getting their content ideas from at the moment. So I'll just go through a few of these results. So next slide, please. So the first question was, do you add regular content to your website, such as blogs and guides? So regular content, as many of you will know, I'm sure, is really, really important for SEO. So fortunately, the answer was, next slide, please. Yes, in over 90% of cases, I think that's about 93, 94% of the people we surveyed were in fact adding regular content. So that is fantastic. Only a very small number weren't doing that already. Next slide, please. Sorry. Do you produce as much content as you would like? Was the next question. The answer here was a little bit different. Overwhelmingly, quite a similar number, in fact, said no, we are not producing as much content as we would like to produce. So the following question was, next slide, please. Why do you think this is? And they had the choice of selecting more than one answer if there was more than one reason. Next slide, please. So a number of reasons came to the fore. The primary one was a lack of time. You know, people had too many other competing demands on their time, and they simply couldn't keep up with the schedule of content that they wanted to produce. Other reasons included a lack of motivation. You know, people felt that their audience wasn't really that interested in what they had to say, and it was a lot of effort for maybe not that much tangible reward. A lack of planning was also quite a key factor. In fact, after lack of time, it was the most common reason why people didn't produce as much content as they wanted. And a lack of inspiration also sort of featured. Next slide, please. So we moved on to, do you use Google Analytics? Actually, can we just pop back to the previous slide? I just wanted to make one little point about that. There we go. Now, yes, a point I wanted to make was, now lack of time, unfortunately, isn't something we can do very much about. We just have to do the best that we can. But the other things I think are actually all linked, because I think if we don't feel inspired and we're not confident that we're writing the right sort of content, then it's quite difficult to feel motivated and to plan for it and to sort of build it into our schedules. Okay, let's move to the next slide, please. Do you use Google Analytics? That's an important one, obviously, given the topic of today's talk. And the answer was mostly yes. A good 90% were in fact using it, only 10% weren't. However, next slide please. If yes, why do you use it? And again, they could select more than one reason if they were so inclined. Now, the most obvious one, of course, to monitor traffic, and that's fair enough, that is what it's well known for, and also to analyse traffic sources, that was the next most popular, to monitor bounce rate, to measure engagement, but look, right down at the bottom of the list, to generate content ideas. In fact, we've got fewer than 40%, which means more than 60% of content marketers are using analytics, but they're not using it to come up with new ideas for content. And I think this is a really, really big oversight. Everybody wants to know how much traffic they got. You know, that's understandable. The SEOs, you know, largely use it to have a look at traffic and where it came from, and I'm sure there's plenty of SEOs thinking that's a gross oversimplification of what they do. Sorry about that. But as content marketers, we want to know about traffic too, because it's a really obvious and it's a legitimate form of validation. If we've spent a lot of time and effort creating a guide or a blog, we like the idea that we can pop into Google Analytics and say, look, you know, 1,000 people read it, fantastic, it was a success. But I don't think that's enough of a measure of success, because you know, there's actually nothing in the number of people that looked at something that tells us how good that piece of content was. It just tells us that somehow or other they arrived at it. And actually, there's nothing really within bounce rate that tells you that either, because somebody could really spend a long time reading your piece in detail and gaining a lot from it, but then leave without going anywhere else. And that person is a bounce, or counted as a bounce in analytics. So I think actually we need to look at other indicators within Google Analytics as to how people have really responded to the content. So that brings us on to the next slide, please. And what I'm going to show you for the rest of the presentation today, which is my content inspiration dashboard. So this is a custom dashboard that I've created for Google Analytics. Now, if you wanted to download this dashboard and use it, import it into your own Google Analytics account, you're more than welcome to do that. And the link at the bottom is the one you need to follow. I'll show the link again at the end, so don't worry if you've not got the time to jot it down now. So as you'll see on the screenshot here, there are 5 widgets on this dashboard. So I'm going to go through each one in turn and just sort of show you how I sort of use these reports to analyse existing content. Now, as I've sort of indicated just now, I'm not that interested in traffic. You know, I'm not really going to spend a lot of time looking at how many hits or, you know, repeat visits came to which pages. I'm going to look at engagement and show you the tools that I think best measure engagement. Okay, next slide please. So this is the first widget, and it will be a familiar one to those of you who already use Google Analytics. It's new versus returning visitors. Now, on its own, it doesn't really give us that much useful information about content. In fact, it tells us nothing about content. It just tells us that out of however many people have come to our site, around 80% are new and around 20% have visited before. Great. but let's make it slightly more relevant to content. Next slide, please. When I go into that report, what I'm going to look at in the first column there is the average session duration, and then the average session duration compared to the site average for returning versus new visitors. And what we see here is actually very interesting, because we see that although the returning visitors may make up a smaller percentage of total visitors, their engagement and their interest in the site is massively higher than that of the new visitors. So from a content production perspective, if we have the next slide, please. It tells us that we should not gear all of our website content towards our new visitors, which I think is what a lot of websites do. You know, they're all about introducing the brand, welcoming new people, and that's great, you need to do it, but you also need stuff for people who are loyal and who come back and who spend more time on your site. So for the new guys, you want sort of quite, I would say, short and snappy bits that don't take that long to read. You know, they're new to the site, they're not prepared to stick around for as long as the returning visitors, so, you know, don't place demands on them with huge volumes of content. You know, just sort of get to the point and get them interested. And also sort of improve internal content linking. You know, if you want to try and encourage those session times up a bit for the new visitors, you know, give them something short and snappy, but then, you know, if it's sort of interested them, give them a decent sort of internal, you know, link path so they can follow that kind of content around your site and get more into it and more engaged. For the returning visitors, that's where you can afford some slightly longer form stuff. They might even be prepared to download, you know, give you their details in order to download some gated content if they're sort of invested enough to stick around for several minutes. And you can also look at creating blog pieces specifically for people who are coming back, you know, regular features, 3-4 part blog series, that kind of thing. Next slide, please. And you can give it a little tweak as well. So here we're looking specifically at returning visitors. Now, this doesn't have a widget, or it would have been the 6th widget that I included. If you go to your audience reports and then behavior, there's a little subsection in there called frequency and recency. And yes, I recognize recency is not a real word, but Google has seen fit to include it, so I'm repeating it here under duress. But frequency and recency is really interesting because it tells you that of the people who've returned to your site, how often do they come and how much time passes in between their visits. So you can actually run this report to look at the distribution of returning visits. So whether people are coming back, you know, within a day, 2 days, 3 days, 2 weeks, a year is as far as it goes. So you want to make sure that your publishing schedule at least keeps up with the frequency with which people are coming to your website. So if you know that you've got, you know, strong returns on a weekly basis, then you want at least a weekly, you know, sort of new thing going up. And if you want to stay a little bit ahead of that curve and encourage people to come even more frequently, you might look at publishing twice a week. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next widget concerns location. Now, I've run an example here of UK cities, but you can easily adapt this to look at sort of different countries and continents if your reach expands that far. So again, it's a fairly standard widget that many of you will have seen before. It just sort of shows you the distribution of location of your website visitors, but I've actually run it against average time on page rather than just how many people come from each location, because I'm interested in you know, how long they actually want to stick around once they've got there. Next slide, please. So for average time on page, again, I've run the first column just with the number of minutes and seconds that users from these locations have stuck around, and then the second column shows how that benchmarks against the site average. And it's quite clear, even just from the top 10 results here, that there's a, you know, really sort of strong engagement from certain locations, and then, you know, not so good engagement from other locations. So the task here is to look through which locations these are and ask, do we have clients in these locations, or do we want clients in these locations? Next slide, please. Okay, so the impact on the content planning, sorry, thank you. The impact on the content planning is that where we have locations where people are really, really engaged, and those are also locations where we have or we want clients, we need to, step the game up even more, make sure that we've got, plenty of stuff for them to keep them interested. And likewise, if there are target locations which are performing badly for engagement, then we need to look at what kind of content we can create for them. So I would say for weaker locations, that indicates that we need to sort of prove the relevance of the offer. So we might look at case studies, we might look at interviews, things that really sort of demonstrate why they should be spending longer on the website. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the next one is traffic sources. So this is, again, sort of the standard widget with the twist that we're going to look at time on page. For those of you that haven't seen this kind of widget before, basically it sort of has 4 broad groups to categorize how people have come to your site. So they've either come directly, i.e. they've just put the website into the browser and there you go. They've come through a sort of social media channel, they've been referred, and maybe they followed a link in an email or another website, or they've run an organic search. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now on its own, even looking at average session duration, it's not particularly helpful in this example. All this really tells us at the moment is that people who come directly or who find us through a search stick around longer than people who click a link on a social media site or another website. We probably could have guessed that. Where it gets interesting, however, is, next slide please, when you have a look at how that benchmarks against new and returning users, as we looked at in our original widget. Now again, we expect that the returning users will be more engaged than the new users, but there is one surprise in here, which is that on social media, there's actually a huge difference. If we look at the sort of second box on the right there, there's a huge difference between returning and new, much bigger than any of the other categories, where the new users from social media are really not that invested at all. They are literally just clicking on a link and going, yeah, whatever, and clicking off again. The returning ones are sticking around for over 4 minutes. So next slide, please. So that says to me that we need a much greater focus on our existing social communities, that those communities are valuable and that we need to spend more time building up our communities on Twitter and LinkedIn, possibly Facebook as well for other kinds of businesses, and making sure that we continually sort of feed them the kind of content that they are clearly wishing to engage with. If we look at the very top of that list as well, it also says to us that we should continue optimizing all of our content for organic search, because even new people from organic search are actually sticking around for almost a minute and a half, which is not bad for a first visit. Look at a remarketing strategy as well. Okay, next slide, please. So finally, we have, not finally, next to finally, penultimate, we have site search. Now, site search is a feature you have to sort of manually switch on within Google Analytics. And what it does is track the keywords and search terms put through your own website search function if you have one. So if you do have the facility on your website for users to run their own searches and look for content on your site, then you should absolutely go into Google Analytics, go to the admin panel and switch on site search tracking, because that will give you some really good information about what sort of terms people are using when they look for stuff on your website. So it's got a lot of uses, one of which of course is to tell you if this is the stuff people are looking for, have we actually got content that matches those queries? But there's also sort of stuff you can look at in terms of, within the search queries themselves, which ones tend to be indicative of more engaged users. So next slide, please. So what I've run here is a report that looks at the terms that people have put into our search bar. We've looked in the first column here, time after search, which is literally the amount of time they've stuck around on the site after they've run that search. And then it's benchmarked then against average search depth, which is the number of pages that somebody has clicked during the session. So we've got a couple which, clearly people are spending a lot of time on the site and they're going to a lot of pages on the site after running a couple of the particular search terms. So that might say to us, okay, so clearly, these users looking at these terms may be more engaged than users looking at, other terms, whether that's because those terms aren't as relevant or whether because of any other reason. Next slide, please. So the impact on our content planning, when we look at the site search report, obviously we need to create more content around any search term that's popular, irrespective of the other metrics that we've just looked at. We also need to fill any content gaps revealed by searches. If people are running searches on stuff and we haven't actually got any content that matches that search, that's a problem. And we also need to investigate relevant content that does match those search terms, that does exist, because there might be a problem with its structure or indeed the navigation of the site if people are sort of having to look at lots of, run searches and look through lots of pages to get to what they want. That might actually indicate a negative rather than a positive. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now this is the, next slide actually. This is the most popular content widget. So this is the one that I think is actually most pertinent to content planning. So this is the all pages report, and you can go to it manually as well. If you don't want to use the widget, you can go to your behavior reports, site content, and all pages, which as it sounds is literally a report of all the pages on your website and all the data pertaining to those pages. Now obviously that's too sort of broad a brush to be that useful. So I would certainly recommend, segmenting this report and you can create what's called content groups in analytics. So you can tell it to just sort of show you your blog or just show you your landing pages or whatever sort of group of content you want to look at. And I've actually run this exercise just for our blog. So I've filtered the results. Sorry, could we just stay on the previous slide for a second? So what I've done is filter the results such that no blog piece that had fewer than 50 unique visitors come to it is included in the report. And that's because I don't want to base future decisions on content that, for whatever reason, nobody really read. I want, sort of content that enough people have come to that there's some significance in the findings. So we're comparing like with like a little bit. So again, I've sort of ordered it by average time on page and looked at which articles have encouraged people to spend the longest amount of time reading them. Next slide, please. Now at this point, we leave Google Analytics and go to Excel, where I've created a custom spreadsheet, which is also available in the download via the link I showed at the beginning, and I'll show again at the end. And what I've done is import that data from the All Pages report, filtered by average time on page, excluding sort of stuff that didn't get viewed, imported it into Excel and run a bit more analysis on it. So what I've done is I've had a look at the average time on page, but I've also looked at length. So for example, if a piece of content that was sort of 1,000 words got someone sticking around for 4 minutes, that's great. But what if somebody spent the same amount of time reading a 500-word piece? As we can see actually in examples number 2 and 3 here on the list, that might indicate to me that actually the 500-word piece was slightly more compelling because people felt the need to spend longer reading it. So doing this sort of external content analysis, it gives you a more targeted and more kind of insightful view of your existing content, and it can start to sort of help you extrapolate for future content. So for example, after we look at sort of length and benchmark that against time on page and look at actually what was the average time per 500 words, Then we can start to look at features within the content itself, both the titles and the actual content. Now, the more I've only included about 10 pieces or so in this. This exercise is far more meaningful if you run it on a larger scale. So if you can sort of bear to do it for 50 or 100 pieces, then you'll get much better results from it. So for example, if we look at the sort of bottom section here of the spreadsheet, content type, we've got a lot of curation and a lot of education. Does the title starts with a number? It simply means, does the title start with a number? Is it a so-called listicle piece? True and false. In 70% of cases, we can see that, yeah, the most popular stuff in terms of how long people stuck around did start with a number. So these list-based pieces are clearly, doing something for us. Is a question, that means, was there a question? Is the title phrased as a question? Only 1 out of the top 10, only 10%. So actually phrasing the title as a question isn't particularly helpful for us. We also looked at tone, tone of the piece. Is it a neutral piece? Is it positive? Is it negative? Sort of top 10 fails of content writing being an example of negative. Actually, of the most popular stuff, there was nothing negative at all. Most stuff was neutral and some things were actively positive. Does it address the user directly? So 50-50 doesn't seem to make much difference. And then again, some more sort of word analysis stuff, and you can obviously put any sort of wording you want here. So we found that including the word statistics, that one word appears actually in 30% of our most popular pieces. So that indicates to me that there's a strong desire amongst our readership, at least, for sort of data-based journalism. How to appears in 10%, suggesting it's that's still quite a high representation for a single phrase, but it's not it's not 30%, so it suggests it's worth doing, but we don't want every single piece to start with how to. And of course, the word copywriting is quite a relevant one to us and appears in 20% of our most popular pieces. But the point I think I want to make with this sort of analysis is that you want to think outside of stuff that just has a number on it. You want to sort of look at your particular set of content and look at all the things that you've been trying and test them, sort of analyze them and see whether they've had the impact on engagement that you hoped for when you implemented those ideas. Okay, next slide, please. Actually, I've covered that in the previous description. Next slide, please. Okay, I think I've gone ahead of myself. I've talked about the whole spreadsheet in one slide. If we could carry on, please. Next slide. Okay, yeah, again, I've already said all of that. Next slide. Okay, yeah, it's all about whether you're inside analytics or looking at the spreadsheet or just, thinking about it on your own time. It's all about looking for patterns. And that's why I said, the more content you can analyze for these exercises, the better, because it gives you a much more reliable result if you can look at 50 or 100 pieces rather than just 5 or 10. But, don't get caught in analysis paralysis, because, the thing with analytics, sort of by definition, is that there's so much analysis you can do, there are so many numbers you can pull that don't actually mean anything. They don't actually help you to create better content, which is what we need to do. That's the goal. So instead, we're looking for the patterns that the numbers reveal. What are the common features across our best content, and what are the common features across the worst content? So all of that stuff I showed you in the spreadsheet, looking at your most popular, you could use that for the least popular stuff and look at what kind of things could be common across pieces that are putting people off and making people not want to stick around. So use your Google Analytics data as a starting point. You can create your own custom dashboard, or you're very welcome to adapt mine so that you can quickly access just the sort of data about your content that helps you plan better stuff for the future. So that pretty much brings us to the end. And this is the link again, so it's just writemysite.co.uk/content inspiration. So it comes with the link to the dashboard, so all you need to do is just make sure that you're sort of logged into Google Analytics. And then sort of click the link and you should be able to just import that, no problem. You can use the spreadsheet, just delete all of our data and put your own in. And there's also just an article I wrote called 10 Sources of Content Inspiration, if you want to take the search for great content outside of analytics. So thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to taking any questions.
Thank you very much, Emily, for doing an amazing webinar. I enjoyed it a lot, and I was the one who was moving slides. Unfortunately, today we had some kind of a technical clash. And so actually I have a question from my side, and I'm sure I'm really encourage our audience who was so much attentive, which was so much excited to share actually questions. So because that's a really good point to do it, the best time to ask. So I have a question about actually, do you use any kind of other tools besides Google Analytics to make your content simply works in terms of putting everything on track?
I'm not sure I caught the whole question. Do I use something
yeah,
than
sure.
Google
I mean, like, I meant, like, do you use any kind of additional tools besides Google Analytics to promote and to somehow launch your content and to create ideas about your content?
Oh, yes. Thank you. Actually, that's contained within the 10 Sources of Content Inspiration, which is also on the blog somewhere now. I've published it since then. But there's loads of stuff. I mean, the first one of the 10, a little teaser for it, is, believe it or not, the pub. You know, take your customers out for a drink, talk to them. You know, we can get so caught up in tools and technology and all the rest of it, but actually we need to talk to the people who we hope are going to read the content and find out what they want to see on our blogs and websites. So that's number one. That's where we should all start. And then, you know, if you sort of want to enhance that with tools and analytics, there's loads of stuff. There's Answer the Public, if you want to look at what people are typing into Google. There's BuzzSumo and that sort of stuff for social analytics to look at what kind of stuff's popular there. Yeah, there's absolutely tons of tools available. Some of them are really, really helpful.
Okay, actually I have a question from Paul, and he's asking, what do you recommend in terms of the length of content? What is the best actually from your experience?
Oh, that's a great question, length of content. Actually, all of the data that I've come across suggests that in terms of engagement, the best lengths are sort of stuff between 1,000 and 2,000 words. They tend to get more links and more shares. It doesn't make any real difference from Google's point of view. You know, as long as it's more than 300 words or so, it's not going to be classed as thin content. Google doesn't really care if your stuff is 500 words, 1,000 words, or 2,000 words. It does care, obviously, how engaging it is and how high quality it is.
Okay, yeah. Actually, it's right now. It's coming on my mind. Also, BuzzSumo, great research about the length of content. So, guys, if you're really interested in digging into this topic, I recommend you to check it because they analyzed a lot of content and they're like providing a really insightful analytics about them. And we have a question from Kate. She's asking. Do you use any tools to measure the success of your content? Any kind of, let's say, how-tos here, just to be sure that your content is doing really great?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to all the stuff within analytics, you can look at your social performance as well. You know, all the sort of tools like Sprout Social and Hootsuite, you can keep track of how many people have liked and shared and commented, because that's really important as well. And there's obviously lots more stuff within Google Analytics than what I was able to show in this brief presentation. And, you know, I repeat my earlier point, ask your customers, ask your readers, you know, ask them what stuff stood out for them, what they liked and didn't like and want to see in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. Really great answer. I love it. I have the very last question. Actually, it's from my side about running any kind of surveys. Do you use any kind of specific tools to run them, or just like Google surveys? What do you recommend to do it in order to ask your audience, for example? So how you normally proceed this one?
Sorry, can you repeat the question,
Yeah,
please?
I meant that like you are like mentioned that you are doing surveys, and the question is, do you recommend to use any kind of specific tools to do it, or just I don't know, any kind of tool will work here?
Well, there's lots of questions about tools.
Yeah, the question is about running surveys. I mean, like you mentioned that you recommend, yeah, to run
For
surveys.
series.
Yeah, surveys. And so
Okay.
basically you can do it with a kind of a huge range of tools. So do you use any particular one?
No, no particular one for series versus other kinds of content. Choosing a topic for a series really just depends whether that topic has enough meat on its bones. Because when I answered the earlier question about longer pieces get more engagement, that's not because they're long. That's because they've been well structured and have gone into lots of detail and they're worthy of that length. And I'd apply the same rule to a series. There's no point taking something that only deserves 500 words and then spinning out 1,500 words through 3 parts. You have to make sure that the topic is substantial enough to justify that kind of word count and interesting enough to sort of tempt people back week after week. And it's not a tool as such, but one good idea, and it is within the 10 sources piece as well, is have a look at what other people are doing and think how you can do it better. If you see somebody else's series doing really well, obviously don't copy it, absolutely not. But ask yourself, why did that perform well? How have people responded to it? What can I sort of draw from that, extrapolate from that to create something even better of my own?
Okay, got it. Thank you very much.
You're
Actually,
welcome.
I really love your point about not just simply copying anything, which is like, yeah, I agree for 100% about that. It's just like each time you need to invest new ideas, maybe based on other ideas, but it still should be unique. Thank you very much, Emily, for doing an amazing webinar and joining us today, finding the time to do it. Really appreciate that. And the recorded webinar will be shortly published on YouTube channel, so stay tuned about that. So thank you very much, guys, for joining us today as well, and have a lovely evening. Thank you very much. Thank you, Emily.
You're welcome. Thanks everyone for coming and listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.